luna, 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 que ya me voy pa' la montaña. A luna, 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 que ya me voy pa' la montaña. Llevo mi mochila, café y canela, y en mi corazón a mi Cayela. Llevo mi mochila, café y canela, dame mi corazón a mi Cayela. También me llevo mi guitarrita para entonarme una buena cumbia. También me llevo mi guitarrita para entonarme una buena cumbia. Y cuando salga el sol por la mañana cantando yo me voy pa' mi cabaña. Y cuando salga el sol por la mañana cantando yo me voy pa' mi cabaña. También me llevo mi guitarrita para entonarme una buena cumbia. También me llevo mi guitarrita para entonarme una buena cumbia. Ay, luna, 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 que ya me voy pa' la montaña. Ay, luna, 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 que ya me voy pa' la montaña.
Mancha Gonzalez, I'm a pariente to this community, and our community is a community of Genizaros. Genizaros is a new race that initially initiated because the Spaniards didn't want to cross the ocean and be called wetbacks, so they decided to look at the beautiful ladies that were here of the indigenous people. So consequently, the priest says, well, how are we going to name this new race, this new raza? And they named them Genizaros. And then, of course, they had other categories of names. But fortunately for us, we have been able to retain a portion in some of the songs and traditions that were sent to us by our forefathers. And I happen to be one of the people that I can take great pride in saying I'm a Genizaro. I'm from this community, born and raised here, chased away from Talpa because I was from Ranchos. Chased away from Ranchos because I was from Talpa. So finally I went to Llano Quemado, and there they accepted me because all the chaquehueros says, hey, this has got to be a Comanche, you know. And then finally I graduated from 1955 from the big school in Ranchos de Taos, and I graduated the 8th grade. Mind you, the 8th grade, huh? Gosh. And from there I went to Taos High. And then from Taos High, I was, I used to have so much of a conflict here fighting because I was from Ranchos, I was from Talpa, I was a chaquehuero, I was not a chaquehuero, I was a cebollero, back and forth. So I decided I would go to Manal School in Albuquerque. And by going to Manal School, what happened is that I said, well, my dad can't afford that. So I decided to become a sheep herder. And I was a sheep herder about age 15, 16, probably 14. And I wound up going to Manal School. And in Manal School, I finally decided, hey, let's go back to Brill Cream. And I came back to Taos, graduated from Taos High. And I enjoyed the beauty and the cultura, the warmth of our community. And I'm proud to say that my prima here happens to have had that instilled in her by her dad and her mom, see?
Thank you.
And her grandma happened to be mi tia, because she happened to be sister to my grandpa. And I'm so proud to say mi tia. My grandma used to send me with little packages. Go take this to your tia. Go take this to your tia. And then my tia would take this back to my comadre. So I was used to do back and forth. You know. And so it's my honor of being here and being invited by my prima, and with her authority, or what did you call it, with her telling me, she's a guide, and telling me when I want to share some of our songs, some of the history of the Comanches in our community, and why the Comanches still prevail and exist. So I will allow my prima to introduce myself again.
Thank you, Primo. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Oh, it's so wonderful to see all of you here. Olivia and I have talked about making this an annual tradition. My name is Jan Smith, and I am very excited that I'm the director of Somos. And Somos is a literary organization. This is going to be our 40th year, and we have also thousands and thousands of used books for sale between $1 to $3. So come see us. We're on Civic Plaza Drive. I hope you came really hungry, because there is a wealth of food right beyond those doors. When we take a break, Olivia will let you know when we can all disperse to the kitchen and help ourselves to some traditional food. Olivia Romo, I met her in 2010. She was in Taos High School. She was on the award-winning slam poetry team. Woohoo! And I was so impressed with her then. I'm even more impressed with her now. She is one of our board members and has been now for, I think this is your 3rd year, or yes. And she's, of course, you know, she's a poet, she's a farmer, she's a supporter of acequias, and I'm sure lots more that I don't even know about. And she is the one who curated this evening, so everything that you see was put together by her, and she invited the storytellers who are going to grace you tonight with their stories. Welcome, Olivia.
Well, good evening. Buenas noches a todos. Welcome to our beautiful escuelita aquí here in Ranchos de Taos, here in Talpa. This is the beautiful escuelita that even my dad went to school, and this is the most beautiful little gathering space that we have here in Ranchos. And I just first want to take an opportunity to thank Somos and to thank our staff for all the organizing efforts in putting together the Storytelling Festival. So thank you, Jan Smith, our executive director. I want to thank Ariana Kramer, also staff with Somos, who made the chile and was helping us get here tonight in all of our events. And I don't know if I missed anybody from the board, but if anybody from Somos board is here as well, I don't want to forget you. I have a few opening remarks, and then I'll introduce my tellers and we'll get started. And if I didn't thank already the Talpa Community Center staff, there was the market this morning, so everybody filled up on all their harvest goodies, but thank the Talpa Community Center for hosting us. Before we begin, I really just want to take a moment to acknowledge that we're here in the homeland of the Red Willow people. This building, it's a very historic, community building, but this is also on the Cristóbal de la Serna land grant, and is continued to be fed by the Rio Chiquito and the Rio Grande del Rancho that feeds all of our beautiful acequias and the families who continue to maintain these traditions and ways of life. Let us also take a moment to remember our sisters, Shirley Reyes and Brandy Lee Davis, who lost their lives in senseless violence very recently. I want us to take a moment to, in silence, and honor the memory of all First Peoples, the land, and that together we can become a more resilient community. Let's please take a moment of silence. Thank you so much. We have this beautiful altar here too that I want to bring some attention to. There's semillas and seed balls and some santitos, and we have some beautiful arte also from some of our local artists. Our great Anita Rodriguez, some of her paintings. So please, if you have an offering of any kind, even if it's something you write tonight, please feel free to bring it to the altar and to the intentions. I also, of course, want to thank my parents because they're the ones that made the pozole, and we're here helping us get the chairs together and everything. And my pareja Mateo, I don't know where he's at, somewhere over here. Just thank you guys for all the support. But I want to begin, of course, especially with my primo, Francisco Gonzalez, Comanche, to come and also hear from Ranchos de Taos. If you would please give us the blessings of a few prayers and songs before we begin, I would love that. So thank you, Francisco.
Buenas tardes. En nombre del Padre, el Hijo y el Espíritu Santo. Dios bendito, gracias te damos por la audiencia que está aquí presente. Gracias te damos por la comida que trajeron para nosotros. Y gracias te damos por la oportunidad de expresarnos. Te pidemos que estés con nosotros, guíanos y guárdenos de todo mal. Y te pidemos, Dios bendito, que estés con nuestros seres queridos donde quiera que estén. Bendiga nuestra comunidad, tráiganos su luz que ilumine nuestros caminos. Todo en el nombre de Cristo Jesús, nuestro Señor. Amén.
Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, the songs that the Comanches have are mostly known as traveling songs, because the Comanche traveled throughout. We read history from not only Texas, but New Mexico, Arizona, and in Colorado, Oklahoma, because they were a nomadic tribe. And the Comanches comprised of clans. And there are many, many stories that have come to light, not only in our community, but also now people have been writing about them. But there's one story in particular that the Comanches, one clan came here and got upset because of my memory's now affected me. But anyway, Villalpando was his name. And Mr. Villalpando was a resident of Ranchos de Taos. He had several beautiful ladies in his family. And one chieftain from one of the clans came over and says, I love your daughter. And he says, I'm going to give you 6 horses for her, which is more than we normally pay for a lady. But Mr. Villalpando says to the chieftain, the clan chieftain, says, mira, wait a minute, man, she's only 12 years old. Wait till she gets another year older, and then you can take her with you. Because usually it was at that time that women of your age of 13 were able to get married, and that was all right in those times. Now we're waiting till 18, 21, 31, 41, and 51. But anyway, so the chieftain says, okay. And in the mind, I would say, in Mr. Villalpando's thinking, says, this guy, because they're always warrior-like, he'll get into some kind of a skirmish, and Lord and behold, he won't come back. Well, unfortunately for Mr. Villalpando, that did not happen. So Mr. Villalpando decided to go to Taos, Don Fernando de Taos, and to the Pueblo and seek reinforcements, because the man came back to claim his prize. And he says, I came for my horse. I didn't come for my horses, I came for my bride. And Villalpando, the chieftain found out that Villalpando was negating on that promise. So what he did is he attacked the community of Ranchos de Taos, wiped out all the adult males, and took all the ladies and children, and took them and sold them as servants. Well, one of those ladies, Mrs. Villalpando, wound up to be a very strong entrepreneur in Missouri. And she was sold to this Frenchman. This Frenchman bought her because she was versatile in the languages. She not only knew the sign languages, but also knew some of the languages of the different tribes, and especially the nomadic tribes. And that was a great thing for this Frenchman, because he said, I'm going to make a lot of money, which he did. But in the process, he decided he'd go visit France one more time. But he never returned. Nonetheless, Ms. Villalpando still retained her title as one of very great entrepreneur. And she she had 2 children, I understand, according to the history. But more than this was a written history. But to us, we had a verbal, what you call verbal history. And the verbal history didn't go into the depths that I have gone into with you folks tonight. But nonetheless, it just says that the Comanches, the Apaches, the Navajo, the Utes, all came to the Taos Festival. The Taos Festival is what we call today San Jeronimo. And there they brought in the criados. The criados were servants. That is the word in Spanish for servant. But in northern New Mexico, the word criado means an adopted person. So these criados were brought to be part of the Gonzales, the Martinez, the Romos, the Sanchez, and Trujillos. They became part of the community and the families. But one of the great things that these criados learned and they loved, were the Comanche songs. And I'm going to sing you a traveling song. Traveling songs had a significance, and they had a point, because number one is this: they came to be because of an episode that occurred as they traveled. One clan traveled elsewhere, and then they passed it on to another clan, and they kept learning these songs. But one of the things that prevailed then was the Spanish language, because that was dominant. Today, the English language is dominant. So what happened is they had some of their songs, they used the Spanish language, and I will share one with you. But they also, in 1941, World War II started. There were the tribes, many tribes from different areas of the United States of America got together, be it in Europe or in Asia. And the common thing then was the English language. So they started making up songs like this. Oh yes, I love you, honey. I don't care if you marry second time again. Oh yes, I love you, honey. I will take you home in my one-eyed Ford. And a one-eyed Ford was an old Model T that had a busted light. But in Spanish, it went like this. Ponte noche pa tu casa y mi luz en tu ventana. Tú siempre vas a ser el lucero en mi mañana. That's last night. I went by your house, and I saw that light illuminating your house. I want you to know that you will always be the sunlight of my life. Glorified the lady, but then antes no llevo tu casa ni me dices de cenar tortillitas chamuscadas y frijoles sin guisar. And you gave me dinner, but damn, you gave me tortillitas chamuscadas, which means that the tortillas were burned, okay? And then the frijoles, they just didn't taste right, you know? So then comes the other verse, it says, Ante no llego a tu casa y me dices de cenar, mala cocinera eres tu comida sin guisar. So he chastised her. He says, damn, darling, your food wasn't what, but I'll tell you what, this food back here, it is super good. Then comes the other verse, it says, so that really upset the lady, right? Of course. Then it comes, antes no llego a tu casa y dormí en tu gallinero, a que maldito tu gallo me manchó todo el sombrero. Threw him in the, you know, today we say he threw me in the doghouse, but that in those years, threw him in the chicken coop. But anyway, they also had songs like El Comanche, El Apache se citaron una guerra. El Comanche no se raja, el Apache se le aferra. Both the Comanche and the Apache, that's basically what it's saying, symbolically saying, neither of them gave in. They were just as determined of each other's presence, you know. Si tú vayas para abajo, aprevente del mortal, porque la muerte de allá es firme, no se rebaja. If you ever wind up in Navajo land, I want you to know, hey, you better be cool, because those people, the Navajos, you don't mess with them. And you can ask me personally, I know that. There are many coplas, but I'm not here to give you all my coplas. So I'm here really to just compliment my prima here. And I love you for giving me the opportunity, primita, of being here, okay? And
Thank you. Everybody give a round of applause for my prima Comanche.
Honestly speaking, I heard her dad and her mom did some beautiful lunches, so I'm here for the lunch. Thank you for the honor.
Thank you, Francisco, so much. Thank you. Another round of applause for Francisco. We can have you, if you'd like, we could take a seat right here next to Juanita.
Anita, okay. I understand that Anita's boyfriend chose her because he was allergic to algodón, so he chose Lanita.
There you go. Well, tonight I have the great honor of having also our great maestra and storyteller and activist, Anita Rodriguez, here from Taos también. And this is a piece of her artwork. And so again, if you are in the back when we have our break for food, please make your way up this way and you can have a look at some of the arte también. But this is Anita, I'll let you take it away.
I've been thinking about something a lot lately, and I picked this particular painting because I have painted this theme again and again. Is that better? And it's a theme that's very close to my heart. I grew up here in Taos. Ours is one of the founding families of Taos. I'm not from Talpa. You know, like when I grew up, Talpa was almost a foreign country. You know, it was really far away. But I grew up in Taos, and one of the things that really affects our life here are all of the historical traumas that have gone down. I don't want to talk about just the pretty things, the ristras, you know, the tamales, and all of the colorful things about our culture. I also think that one of the things that makes us so beautiful are the shadows and the tragedies, because our people have suffered a lot. By the time my mother, who was from Texas, came to Taos, we had already lost 80% of our land. We were an agricultural people, and we have a saying, cuando vino el alambre, vino el hambre. When they brought the wire, hunger came. We could no longer gather piñon, we could go hunting, we couldn't pasture our sheep. The biggest landowner in northern New Mexico is BLM. And the Kit Carson. And I want to thank Olivia because tonight she did something that nobody does. Yes, this is Tiwa land. This is the land of the Red Willow people. But she reminded us that this is also the De la Serna land grant. And our people have been here for 500 years, 25 generations. And the night that my mother came to Taos, she and my grandmother from Texas, who was a sophisticated white lady who came from a slave-holding family, drove down the road from Santa Fe to Taos. And in those days, it wasn't paved. You know, like you had to get out of your car and move the rocks. We had a highway department, but we had a saying, si se mueven son vacas. Si no, es el highway department. For those of you who don't understand, if it moves, they're cows. If not, it's the highway department. So it was a really rough road, you know? And so they arrived into the plaza in Taos at night and checked into the La Fonda Hotel. And my mother was a kind of a rebel. She came to Taos to study art with Walter Ufer. She was tired of the straight-laced, you know, almost Victorian society in Austin, and she wanted to have an adventure. So while my grandmother was getting over ruining her beautiful shoes from moving rocks in the canyon, Mother went outside on the sidewalk in front of La Fonda Hotel to have a cigarette. And in those days, a woman who smoked a cigarette was a rebel. And she was smoking her cigarette, and suddenly this man staggered in front of her and fell down at her feet. His guts opened and spilled out on the sidewalk. He had just come from a famous bar called El Gaucho. And in those days, if you were a kid on the plaza, everybody took care of you. And if you went near El Gaucho, your parents knew about it before you got home. Little did my mother know that the man who came to carry that injured man to Doc Martin's office was the man she was going to marry a couple of years later. So they carried him over to Doc Martin's, and my father tells the story that Doc Martin kept his surgical instruments on the windowsill, and he picked up a needle and he went like that, and he sewed the guy up, and the guy lived for many years after to continue happily drinking. But a few years after that, my mother walked into the drugstore that my father owned on the plaza, and he made her a chocolate soda. Now our ancestors know the aphrodisiac qualities of chocolate, right? Well, it worked. Here I am, right? And I grew up here, and my father was a Tiwa speaker. English was his third language. There was a man from the village who had a twisted leg, and he used to go back and forth between the town and the pueblo, and he would work for my grandma. And he would talk to my father in Tiwa. And then when the war began, they were so desperate for druggists that they gave scholarships to Chicanos to go to Denver to learn to become druggists. And my father was barely an English speaker. He was so poor that he had to mail his shirts home to my grandmother so she could wash them in soap that she made out of pig fat and ashes in the front yard, lye soap. Right? And then she would mail the shirts back to him. Well, As time went on, my father returned to Taos and set up a business, and my sister and I were born, and we grew up on Taos Plaza because that's where our father had a business. So we had a ringside seat on the collision and confluence of three cultures. And the year that, by the time that my mother arrived here and we had already lost 80% of our land, there was a bill before Congress called the Bursum Bill. And it was concocted in secret by a senator who really believed that the communal lands that we had left were backwards, and that what we really needed was free enterprise and private property, and that somehow by converting both Indian and Hispanic lands into real estate, we would be saved from our poverty and our ignorance and our backwardness, because that was the lens through which we were perceived by the new American conquerors who took half of Mexico, Taos included, in the War of 1847. And so after the Bursum Bill leaked out into the art colony here in Taos and in Santa Fe, the artists realized what was going to happen. Mabel Dodge, John Collier, all of that group. You know who they are, Francisco. You know, a lot of these people in this room know who these people were, right? And so they championed the Indian cause. They were painters, so they created these beautiful images of New Mexico. And they stood up for the Indians, and they fought for them, and they got Blue Lake back, and it was great, and I'm glad. I have consistently throughout my entire life been a supporter of Native rights. But the same people who fought to protect Indian culture stole our santos. There was a man from Arroyo Seco whose name was Alberto Duran, and Alberto was a friend of mine. And one time Alberto said to me, "Anita, I want you to tell everybody this. Larry Frank broke into our morada. He stole our santos, and the next day he came back for the doors. Now there is a fabulously valuable, priceless collection of santos in the Fine Arts Museum. There's also a fabulous collection of santos in the Taylor Museum in Colorado Springs. And they hired me to help them rebuild a life-size replica of the Talpa Chapel of Nuestra Señora de los Lagos. And it was recreated in the Taylor Museum in Colorado Springs, which is on Colorado College property. And a few years later, I went back to do some repairs, and I took my daughter with me. And I knew they had a fabulous collection. Backtracking a little bit, my dad had a 1941 Studebaker, and on Sundays he would take us on rides, and he knew everybody because he had a business on the plaza, so everywhere we went he had a primo, a friend, so we were invited into the moradas and the churches, and we saw all of this incredible art, and I was just a little squirt, but I know that this is more than art. Religious art is more than art, but as art, and nothing but art, these are incredibly powerful pieces. And they deeply impressed me. And ever since then, those memories in the shapes of my canvases, in the work that I do, came from that impression. Anyway, there was great championing of the Native culture. But what happens if you have two fields? There's a fence between them. Same seed, same land, same everything, but you only water one. What happens? I ask you to go to the galleries in Taos and look at the names. I have a really happy announcement to add to the shadows that I'm talking about tonight. Something that is uplifting and hopeful. I had a conversation yesterday with Chris Baker, the owner of Taos News, and we had a wonderful long talk. I told him a lot of things that I said I do not ever want to be put in print. This is between us. But there was a conclusion to our talk. And what he has decided, Taos News is now going to take interns from the community. These are young people who have to have either a living or a buried grandparent here in Taos. They will be taken on as apprentices by the journalists at the Taos News. And then they will be sent into the community to which they are related by blood and who will not talk to outsiders, and they will collect the history and the stories, and they will write. And I have talked Olivia into volunteering Somos to also put this, and I have also talked True Kids One, whose mission is to teach media to kids, will also sponsor these young people. So, you know, if you know someone in your community, if you have a relative or a young neighbor who wants to learn how to be a reporter, this is their opportunity. They can make a little bit of money. And they can correct some of the misconceptions that have been written about our people. Because this unwatered field that I'm talking about, this unwatered field that was not championed by the art communities, except in one way. Their perception of our culture is locked in the colonial past. If you're an artist and you're Hispanic, you've got one choice: Santos. And you can't put the work down. Spanish market is fabulous. The Santos are wonderful. The work is incredible. But if you're not a Santero, well, look around. The things that I'm saying, you can verify with your own eyes. Just look. And so I'm really happy that this opportunity has arisen, and I know that some of our people are, so I have heard, you know, el mitote, the rumor is, you know, I don't buy the Taos News, it's not about us. Buy the paper, support these kids, buy 2 copies and give one to somebody else. If the Taos News supports us, I'll support them. Not because they publish me, because they won't. Because I don't care. You know, I can get published anywhere I want, actually. So that's not my angle. My angle is that I want to hear the voices of our people. I want to hear our history, you know. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Aquí, in the spirit of stories, right? The word somos means we are. Somos aquí. Estamos aquí. Very resilient, beautiful community. Thank you for your truth, maestra. And thank you. And yes, if you have young people, the Somos Writers Program also has a Young Writers Program. And this is an opportunity for young people to really partner with incredible artists and writers and storytellers, and to be able to share our stories. And so thank you again for reminding us about the importance of, you know, nuestra herencia and our tradición, and making it heard. And here we are. Thank you. And next we have my dear friend, David Garcia del Huache. And he is an incredible musician. And if you ever see me and David together, it's not really doing poetry or stories, it's doing teatro. And in this very community center for the acequias, we used to put on some really fun teatros, and we used to have a blast. And so this is my dear friend David, and I hope you enjoy some of his música and his stories.
Muy buenas tardes les de Dios a todas, todes y todos. Mi nombre es David García. Yo soy de la comunidad de San Antonio del Huache, que queda ahí en tierras tehuas, en el valle del Río Grande y el valle del río Chama, ahí al sur de aquí. Y es un gran gusto estar aquí. Yo soy fuereño, no soy de Taos ni del condado, soy del condado de Río Arriba, ¿no? Pues it's interesting. For many years, you know, the state was, oh, thank you. I think I'll just talk loud. Is that okay?
Can you guys hear back there?
Okay. So for many years, you know, Taos being like the most northern estado, condado of the state, you know, much of New Mexico traditionally was divided Rio Arriba y Rio Abajo, and we ended up, you know, that identity really hasn't really. No one really says I'm a Rio Ribeño or soy Rio Sureño, no? You know, Rio Bajeño, and so it's really interesting to say how we identify with our water basins, and you know, I'm proud to say that my family, I grew up on the acequia de los Salazares, which is the southernmost acequia on the Rio Chama, and so my first job was acequia peon at the age of 15, 16, and so I think it's really important that we honor our peones in our communities because you know they bring life to our fields, they bring life to our families, and oftentimes are the most underpaid workers in our community. And so, and I'd like to, it's such an honor that Maestro Gonzalez and Maestra Rodriguez spoke about the topics that they spoke upon. I'm going to be talking about a project that I've been working on most of my life. I've been looking at Spanish language newspapers in New Mexico from the Mexican American War, the 1846, all the way up until statehood in 1912, and up into World War II. There was over 190, almost 200 Spanish language newspapers in New Mexico, and so we had a community that was, you know, that had a very critical readership. And so the project that I've been doing is looking at corridos that had been published in the Spanish language newspapers and composing music to them. Because a lot of times that the words kind of stay in the archive, and how we can, in many ways, listen to these stories and bring them out into the public. And so one of the first songs that well, actually it's not a song. It is sharing two songs today, or two pieces that come from Spanish language newspapers. The first one is called Adiós Llano de San Juan, and it's a poem that was written typically as Mr. Maestro Gonzalez had spoke about the borregueros, the pastores that worked in New Mexico, that left to different places, to Colorado, to Wyoming, to work the borrega. And oftentimes there was a sense, and since, you know, oftentimes I say I use papeles, you know, to kind of remind me, because my memory now that I'm young is really bad. Hopefully it'll get better when I get older. So I wanted to. The first piece is a critical admonishment that is written in the paper from a man who comes from the Taos County. His name in the newspaper, he identifies himself as Jose B. Velázquez. Talking to people in the community of Llano de San Juan, we think that this is actually, it was a misprint, and it perhaps the Vázquez family rather than Velázquez. But what's very interesting about this piece, Adiós Llano de San Juan, is it talks about the colorism and classism that existed at that period in time. Who were the family members that had to leave, and who inherited the land, who got to stay, in terms of thinking about, and oftentimes these are very deep questions within our own families in terms of thinking about colorism. Oftentimes our family members, you know, there's the colorist notions that pues el más blanquito es el más bonito, no? And oftentimes, and so what happens in this particular poem is that he leaves and he's asking for a ride from a person in his community that is really, he's a well-known person, and as a matter of fact he calls him Don, and he says the man doesn't want to give him a ride to the depot, to the train station, or the bus station, to catch the pasajero, and he says porque me ven trigueño. So that's one of the issues in terms of thinking about within our community. We come from a community that's very diverse. Oftentimes in the American, after the Mexican-American War, we got classified into very limited ways of who is a Native American, who's Spanish, who was and prior to that, under the Spanish under the Spanish crown. There was a lot of diversity in terms of thinking about, there was also a very oppressive caste system where there was more than 52 caste classifications in addition to, but I'll read the poem that it's called Adiós Llano de San Juan. I'm going to preempt it from a song that's called La Vida del Borreguero. La vida del borreguero es una vida arrastrada, de andar ya en la borrega, yugar, con su chaqueta y almohada. Pues no me enredo, le digo por mi experiencia, ya traías tus borregas, yo ya perdí la paciencia. Adiós llano de San Juan, sitio del condado de Taos. Ya me voy para Guayuma a pastorear a los ganados. El día 8 de junio 1930, ya yo estaba alistando para salir a la ausencia. Mañana me voy de aquí, voy a buscar un troquero que me lleve hasta el embudo para tomar el pasajero. Me fui para la plaza y a buscar a don Elías, que me llevara hasta el dipo en esos meritos días. Don Elías me responde con su voz muy recortada: yo no le quiero llevar, mi troca está quebrada. Yo, por cierto, lo creí y ahora me estoy acordando que lo hizo para no llevarme y luego anda arrebatando. Otro día que salí con mi mochila y mi maleta, fui a esperar el correo que llegara a la estafeta. En la estafeta de Peñasco, allí sentado estaba cuando pasó don Elías en su troquita quebrada. Siempre hizo Elías su viaje el día que yo salí y lo vi pasar en Peñasco adelantito de mí. Yo me vine para Guayuma, donde había estado primero, y aquí compuso estos versos como humilde borreguero. Aquí estoy de borreguero porque a borregar me dedico, pero le mando estos versos de como un pobre a un rico. Y si porque me ven trigueño cree que no soy formal, al que le debo le pago, mi dinero siempre es igual. No cree que estoy enojado porque me acuerdo de usted. Es por lo que lo he estimado y en el trato que me dio su merced. I'm going to pause there for a second. This is a very interesting poem because this is in the 1930s. And before I do the despedida, this was published in El Nuevo Mexicano newspaper. He wrote from Wyoming to kind of, shame, this person that we imagine this person reading the newspaper, reading, that someone's publicly shaming you in the poetry section of the newspaper. But what's interesting here is how he signs off this Jose Vasquez from Llano de San Juan, because oftentimes we think about this term in the 1960s. But all you guys, it's something for, you know, we've heard about all the different terms that people use as they move. They said manitos, hispanos, neo-mexicanos, different terms that were used. But this is an early usage of this term that you're gonna hear. Ya con esta me despido. Me voy a mirar mis ovejas. Creo que será suficiente que le arden las orejas. Aquí les firmo mi nombre, también con mi propia mano. Yo soy José B. Velázquez y soy puritito chicano. The term in many of those, in the newspapers, we do see Chicano being used by migrant workers who even come from New Mexico that do migrant work in Wyoming and Colorado. So it's interesting to see, you know, how diverse our community is, and thinking that maybe a lot of times people think that term was only used in our communities in the 1960s. So it's even being used in the 1930s. The last piece I'm going to do today is in terms of a memorial. We're in 1913, October 22nd, which we're coming up on 110 years this year. Almost nearly 300 mining workers died in the Dawson mines. In 1923, an additional 170 lost their lives in that same mine. Prior to going back to the 1913 disaster, where this corrido was written in the Revista Taos here in Taos. It was written by, we don't know, it's an anonymous writer, but he signs his poem with a nom de plume. It says, pero grullo, which means a lot of these monikers, people knew who wrote it. It was in many ways distancing himself if there was any, you know, he didn't want to take any sort of, the person, whoever wrote it, he or she, basically was putting more attention to the subject matter rather than themselves or who as the writer. But most likely, we're in terms of thinking about who the editor of the paper at the time was, José Montaner, who was Catalan. It's very different for a corrido of that time, but we put these words because I think it's so important that we remember these workers who were many times, the town of Dawson had almost, during the 1920s, I think it was up to nearly a population of almost 6,000 people. And they had a baseball team, they had, prior 6 months following the disaster in Dawson, you have the conflict that occurs, the labor rights conflict that occurs in Ludlow. And Ludlow marks many, some of the same issues that are dealing with safety and numbers of hours that these workers are going through are in many ways, Dawson is kind of the match that lights the activism that happens in Ludlow and that is so violently suppressed by Rockefeller. And so this song, I want to sing this to dedicated to the 300 who lost their lives in Dawson. And this is, as I said, the people that are interested in recovering some of this work. It's like going into the newspapers. The journalism of the past is an important memory for our communities. Looking at some of those newspapers, you see acequia communities that publish their bylaws in the Revista Taos. You see what books were being sold at the newspaper, and you see what the community was reading. You see many of the discussions that were happening at the time, and so it's important that we study the language, not only for it to have a function as something that's folkloric, but as a tool that gives us a deep introspection of the past that we can be able to change our future with it. So this is La Catástrofe de Dawson. mirar tantos infelices, afanosos trabajando para ganar su sustento entre sudor y cansancio. No temían el peligro o lo creían muy lejano cuando vino la explosión que a todos los han matado. Y los 300 mineros que estaban ahí ocupados, casi todos perecieron y muy pocos escaparon. Tendidos y hechos montón, ahí quedaron hacinados. Cuando llegó el auxilio, solo muertos ha encontrado. Qué espectáculo tan triste ofrecía estrago tanto, que mostraban los despojos de tantos seres humanos, sofocados por los gases y por el fuego abrazados. Tal vez algunos de ellos bastante en morir tardaron, y en la prolongada agonía y tormento han expirado, pero al fin a todos ellos la muerte les dio descanso. Y treguas de sus suplicios hallaron entre sus brazos, cuando la muerte piadosa, cuando el dolor ha calmado. Ya con esta me despido, con un respeto sincero a las familias de Dasen y los 300 mineros. We had a project this past year during the pandemic, in the midst of the pandemic, where I, with Dr. Brenda Romero, we recorded these two pieces on a CD. If you don't have a CD player, write me down your email and I'll send you the MP3s. So.
That's so sweet.
Oh, yes.
I just wanted to say that second episode of Dawson, those were the sons of the ones that died in the first explosion. Oh, God. Yeah.
And you go out there today, and it's, you know, there's family members that go and visit every year. During the pandemic, it wasn't, they weren't able to gather as they usually do. But the only thing now that still exists in Dawson is the cemetery. And the families of Dawson meet out there every year. They did this past year. We weren't able to go out and perform that song, but this year. But next year we're going to go out and join them. And if you have a chance, if you don't know where Dawson is, it's located. It's like north of Cimarron, between Raton and Cimarron. And you see some of the burials, and they're young men. Sometimes it's multi-generational. You see like the family Valdez, and you'll see a son that was 16, a brother that was 18, and the older brother was 21, and they all died at the same time. And so it's yes, Master.
Mrs. Huerta, was she part of that family? Mrs. Huerta, who is now working with the farm workers?
The Dawson disasters were the impetus for their family to leave to California. The Dolores Huerta's family And so, in many ways, the notion, the roots of labor movements are rooted here in New Mexico in terms of the injustices that happen to those workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Daddy. Thank you so much. Now we can start singing the labor songs, right? Somos Chicano, tengo valor, right? Dale, dale. I'm going to invite Miss Juanita Lavadi to the stage. She is an incredible muralist. She also does a lot of stitching and fiber work. Juanita also is an incredible acequiera, an acequia advocate and farmer, and my dear, dear friend. So please bring your attention back to the stage and to our sweet Juanita Lavadi. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you for inviting me. And it's this month, the month of October. We're getting ready for, well, in my youth, being here in the United States, getting ready for Halloween. But in reality, there's more to that, because you talk about Halloween, All Hallows Eve. It's the eve before the holy day, this day of Dia de los Santos. And then after that, the next day, November 2nd, is Dia de los Muertos. And Dia de los Muertos, these days, you think of ofrendas and, the recognition, and you see a lot of calaveras. And, it was different, because Dia de los Muertos was actually more of a church event, and going to the cemeteries, and at this time of year, be making flowers out of paper and doing memories, and that's just shifted around. It's kind of, it's shifted to Memorial Day, it's shifted to May. So now, it's funny, we think of Cinco de Mayo, and Cinco de Mayo is a big deal, 5th of May, but it doesn't have anything really to do with the history here. It's actually, that was started with, I don't know if it was Coors, one of the beer companies started. Cuervo, okay. But it's an opportunity, actually, when you're talking about the 5th Cinco de Mayo or Memorial Day on the 30th. If you go to school, those two days, those two holidays actually signify the end of the academic year, and vacation's going to start. So, there's kind of that tie-in to the anticipation you have when, the last days of going to school, the last days you get picked up by the bus. I come from La Loma, and the Trujillo family is from there. It's just right west of Plaza, and we get the wind coming from Taos Canyon, blowing across the canyon, and it passes Enos Garcia School, and then it sinks down to La Loma. So we get the first frost and the last thaw. So we have real growth. It's a slow-growing season there. And it was the Trujillos. There were Trujillos, brother and sister Trujillo here in La Loma, and there was another brother and sister in Costilla, and there were two couples, and so the family is Trujillo and Trujillo, and a lot of Trujillos in the family. But the Trujillo families were also educators. We had a lot of educators here in this area. And to hear this testimony by David Garcia, we were talking about that many newspapers, and it was a place where there was a lot of education. Because of Padre Martinez, it had the first co-ed school west of the Mississippi. Taos also had the first law school west of the Mississippi, and had the first printing press west of the Mississippi. So many families here in ranchos, in Taos proper, many families were really involved in education. And so I know there are people here that I see who have family members that were involved with education, and they can tell you many interesting stories of what education meant at those times. But I am also a school teacher. And I've been fortunate. I've taught here in northern New Mexico. I've taught here in Taos. I've taught in Taos Pueblo. And once my husband died, well, then I was in Albuquerque, and I got to work in the South Valley in the Atrisco schools, and so I am very, very well versed with, well, I'm certified for bilingual education, but full Spanish immersion is, you know, that's my thing. But as a teacher, oftentimes there's, you have professional development. And so you go to the site, if you're in, well, we were involved with a grant by Kellogg, so we were very fortunate. We got to go to Albuquerque, or we got to go to Santa Fe, and you meet there with your school peers who are involved in professional development. So oftentimes when you have this gathering of teachers from different areas, from different parts of New Mexico, you have icebreakers. And so the icebreaker that I'm referring to specifically was, okay, you say your name. I am Juanita Lavadi. I am from Taos Plaza, and I am a saquera. And we were supposed to tell 3 things about ourselves, besides the introduction. So, okay, well, 2 of them had to be true, and 1 of them had to be a lie. So I thought, okay, I have gone down a snow slope on a cookie sheet. I have painted a wall on a scaffold 4 stories high. And I rode a pig that was 200 pounds. So which one was the one that was true?
Or lie.
Well, a lot of people might think, well, you know what, Juanita has done murals. If you go to El Prado and you see the El Prado liquor store mural, that one I did with Enriqueta Vasquez back in 1978. We have repainted it 2 times, 2006, and then, no, 2003, we repainted it. It was 1978, and then 2002, we repainted it because it had, you know, it's an outdoor mural, so we, you know, kind of heightened the colors on that. And then 2006, that was really, this guy was coming in his pickup truck, and boy, he was really thirsty, so he's coming from the north. And just as he gets into El Prado, driving there, he decides, oh, I'm really thirsty, and there's a little Prado liquor store there, so he swerves off the highway, but his brakes failed. So he went through the wall, and he ended up in the refrigerator. But Telesford, the owner of the establishment, was pretty wise in the way he did his insurance, because he insured the mural not as a work of art, because it would not have been covered by insurance, but he insured it as advertisement. So Enriqueta and I got to go back 2006 to repaint that. So yes, there is, I've done murals in Chicago, I've done murals in Las Vegas, in Albuquerque, in Colorado. I'm not doing murals anymore. It's pretty big and I see a lot of walls, but I'm kind of more modest in my style, so I've been doing a lot of intaglio. So then that leaves, okay, the writing the cookie sheet. Yeah, right there across from the library, you see that slope going down to the pasture. Well, it was inner tubes or cookie sheets. So yeah, that was within walking distance from the houses where my grandfather's house or our own house. Doing the mural on the fourth floor scaffold, I never painted on a mural that high. So that was my lie. Oh, well then that means that I rode a 200-pound pig. So that was my grandfather. My grandfather was a Trujillo, Alfredo Trujillo. And he was skilled in many, he was an excellent carpenter. He was a gardener. He was a photographer. As a matter of fact, I still remember his shed there next to the house. He used the nitroglycerin negatives. And so I remember those glass negatives, and just stacks of them in his little photo shed. And he had a little cot there too, so my sister and I would sometimes we'd accompany him and we'd take our naps there. And you can guess nitroglycerin negatives, what happened at one point. It was spontaneous combustion. He lost most of his negatives, but a lot of his photographs had circulated within the family. And I see them being posted on Facebook with a list of all the people that are there. But my grandfather's name is never there. He was the photographer. He was behind the camera. But anyway, he was also an excellent gardener. He had a beautiful flower garden with my grandmother. Of course, all those flowers were for the church. But he was also a bee. He was a bee charmer. And so, you know, he had his bees, and by the bees, he would plant the rhubarbs. That was, the bees would protect rhubarbs. He had this wonderful orchard of apple trees and pear trees. And I remember this one particular year that my grandfather and my grandmother decided they were going to get a pig and get it ready to get the chicharrones and all the wonderful things that you can do from a matanza. And so what he would do is he would keep the pig in the orchard. And so, you know, the sister and myself, we had 4 other playmates. And we decided at one time that let's go get some apples. So we opened the gate and kind of kept through, and the pig was way on the other side where the acequia was on the far end. But so we kind of, okay, this is our chance. So we all run to one of the trees. Each one of us picked a tree, and we just scrambled, screaming and yelling across to the trees. And of course, the pig notices, you know, the invasion of his space, or I can't remember his or her space, but. And so there we were in the trees, and I don't know, all of a sudden we just we were all talking to each other and giggling and everything. And then we decided, hey, when the pig is under us, let's just drop down and ride the pig. And so, you know, each one of us kind of had our turn, you know, waiting for the pig to come under the branch and then just dropping down on it. Yes, we all rode a 200-pound pig. But that was interesting too, because well, afterwards, you know, my grandfather was pretty upset with us doing that because, yeah, the pig was, you know, big, but you could give that pig a heart attack and you can kill it. So it wasn't that, we didn't get off lightly on that. So that's my little story. There's a lot of stories that I think about, but actually tonight I am going to do some music, and okay, yeah, good, thank you. I don't have a strong voice. As a matter of fact, being a visual, I really practice visual literacy in my classroom. And so my kids would tell me when my voice would give out, Miss Lavadi, don't talk, draw it for us. So that would happen. Okay, this is a song from Oaxaca. That's real special this time of year. In some cases, people call it, oh, that's the national anthem of Oaxaqueños. And when you go to Oaxaca this time of year, I think the last time I went with my sister was in 2017, the plane was full. When we got on the plane to go into, it wasn't Mexico City, right off the bat, I can't remember, but it was one of the closest cities. It was packed with people from the United States. And then when we got to this place, we had to get a connection to get into Oaxaca, and it was bus after bus, and just packed with tourists. And so my sister actually lived in Oaxaca for several, for an extended time. So she had a lot of connections there, and she had people. So we were going to be staying at somebody's house. But arriving to Oaxaca, it is pretty amazing because the streets, the 28th, the 29th, the 30th, Halloween, or October 31st, yeah. But you had these days coming up to Dia de los Muertos, November 2nd. And in Oaxaca, you walk through the streets, and all the shops will be putting, making their altares inside, or if not, they'll be decorating the exterior of the establishments. But the streets were packed with tourists painting their faces and wearing their costumes, and just getting involved in the whole element of Dia de los Muertos. And you have stands anywhere in the street, and there'll be high school bands playing. You see the girls with their little trenzas and their pretty dresses, and the guys with their traditional clothing, because the tribal connection is still very strong in Oaxaca. And every stand that you see, whether it's professional musicians or it's an elementary school band, at some point you're going to hear Dios nunca muere. So. I'm going to need it more time. Muere el sol en los montes
que agonizan, pues la vida en su prisa nos conduce a morir. No importa saber que voy a tener el mismo final, porque me quedan consuelo en que Dios nunca morirá. Voy a dejar las cosas que amé, la tierra ideal que me vio nacer. Sé que después habré de gozar la dicha y la paz que en Dios hallaré. Sé que la vida empieza en donde se piensa que la realidad termina. Sé que Dios nunca muere y que se conmueve el que busca su beatitud. Sé que una nueva luz habrá de alcanzar nuestra soledad y que todo aquel que llega a morir empieza a vivir una eternidad. Muere el sol en los montes con la luz que agoniza, pues la vida en su prisa nos conduce a morir. I should leave it there. No, no importa saber que voy a tener el mismo final, porque me quedan consuelo en que Dios nunca morirá.
Thank you, Juanita. Thank you, David, for your assist. And then it is my warmest pleasure to invite my comadrita, my poetic friend, Savannah Rodriguez, to the stage.
Buenas tardes, everyone. So my name is Savannah Rodriguez. I am originally from Peñasco, Rio Lucio. I moved to Taos when I was probably 5 years old and grew up there, or spent most of my life there. And recently moved, or about a year ago, moved to Albuquerque. And it's the first time leaving home to the big city. And so this is my first time back in Taos, and it's so good to be here. So thank you everyone for coming out. I write poetry. That is my method of storytelling. I have been writing for 15 years-ish, and so I'll be sharing some poetry with you tonight. This first one is dedicated to my niece, Alison. People always ask me if I have children. Not yet, I say. My partner and I talk about starting a family. He thinks we will have a daughter first. Laila Milagros will call her. My hips keep getting wider as my body gets closer to motherhood, but my mind isn't quite there yet. I think about legacy and teaching my 6-year-old niece how to make tortillas. I'll get her a step stool and a little apron, and she'll ask me, Tia Vanna, how come tortillas are shaped like the moon? And we'll dance cumbias with our sticky masa hands and lick the butter off of our fingers once we've eaten them all. This next piece is new. I recently wrote this. I wrote this year. This year also learned about the manitos, which are migrant workers who had to leave the north and go further north, go into Colorado to Wyoming for work, because there was no more work here. And a friend of mine was working on an article for El Palacio magazine, and he asked me, do you have a poem about this? And I was talking to my mom. She said, hey, no, your grandparents and your tio and your tias, like they had to do this too. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like that's so cool, this is perfect. So I asked my tio Leroy, and he told me his story, so this was dedicated to my tio Leroy. Summer is here y ya nos vamos a Colorado. Tío Ezequiel, tía Sofia, and the rest of the crew están esperando. I change into my Levi's that I bought with last year's potato harvest money, grab my big hat and long sleeves, estoy listo. We left home when school was finished, when the air was hot and dry, when there was no work and welfare ran out. So we all hopped into the back of the troca and we were on our way. I was 6 years old the first time I went to the fields, too little to hold the hoe, so I watched, learned, understood what work was and the value of feria. I walked up and down the rows, up to all the sweaty trabajadores, Chicanos from all over the place, and offered them daisy cups of water for 1 penny a pop. Back home, there was much time to practice in our gardens. I looked forward to the next job, next town, next field. During the harvest, we went to Monte Vista, filled 1,000 sacks of papas a day for $50 a week. I'd clean acequias on the weekend for 50 cents an hour for pencils and paper and pantalones for my siblings. Sometimes on my day off, I'd take the bus into town, Fort Garland to Alamosa, walked half a mile to the swimming pool, bought a burger and a song on the jukebox. For years after I graduated high school and left home to California, soñé de los campos y los extrañé. Picking peaches, ahí in Grand Junction, string beans in La Junta, boxes of watermelon and cantaloupe, buckets of onions, beets, and lettuce, farmer's tan, knees and hands stained of dirt. I dreamt of summers in Los Campos. So I am a ICU nurse. I have been a nurse for 6 years now. I worked 5 years here at Holy Cross in Taos, and now I work at UNM Hospital in Albuquerque. COVID was a tough time for everyone, of course. So this is my poem about my experience during COVID. It's called Faces. Patient number 1. It was that look she gave me through the glass door of her room, as if she knew she would die, as if she knew I knew too, as if she could see how the virus painted her lungs white, as if she could see her own blue face. Señora, acuéstate en tu panza, I yelled, while I got dressed up as fast as I could to help her turn over, because laying on the belly made them last a little longer, sometimes. Earlier, she asked me if I drank tequila. A veces, I told her, pero eso no me pongo bien. We laughed. Patient number 2. It was those words, that's enough. When he was ready to stop fighting, ready to go meet the God he prayed to all his life, said he was so tired of suffocating and chasing his own breath that he could never catch, so tired of deteriorating his chest wall, a seesaw of struggle, hungry for air and food. Can't eat if you can't breathe. He would ask me every day, do you think I'll get to go home tomorrow? Probably not, Señor. I think he'll be here a few more days. And I kept turning up his oxygen. Patient number 3. It was the hope in his eyes that he was gonna be okay. Said he could breathe just fine, and I was hopeful he was improving. I got to practice my Spanish with him too. He was so relieved when I walked in and could understand him. Finally had someone he could talk to. Then that night when I returned, we couldn't talk anymore. His lungs were inflating by means of machine. I could see his entire face now, an impressive mustache and a breathing tube. He spent most of his stay face down on his bed like we asked him to, so maybe he'd last a little longer. And the next night his bed was empty. I turned to my coworkers. Did he die? No, they said. He was sent to a bigger hospital, alive, had the best chance of survival, they said, until he didn't. This one was the straw that broke my back, my heart, my love for this calling. I remember all the faces of the breathless and the dying alone in their hospital beds, suffocating or sedated with masked strangers gowned in plastic, holding their hands, holding the phone up to their faces for FaceTime with their loved ones, families' faces pressed against the window outside, waving goodbye, sobbing prayers, and squeezing their rosary beads into dust. We handed the padre an N95, gloves, and a gown before he entered the room for last rites. I prayed the Our Father along with him in my head at the nurse's station behind the computer, charting last vital signs and final notes. Our Father who art in heaven, oxygen saturation 55%, patient remains unresponsive, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. These deaths, unnecessary and preventable, entered the kingdom too early. They didn't have to go yet, and yet I cannot forget, I cannot stop thinking of all their faces. I'm gonna end on a happy note. I convinced her. It didn't take much. Okay, so this one I wrote during a workshop with Jimmy Santiago Baca. The prompt was to write a poem about what we think people will say about us at our funeral. So, oh, my poor Hita, I can't believe it. No me puedo creer, one of my tias said. Why did she get that ring in her nose? Parece una vaca, my other tia thought. I hope she accepted Jesus Christ as her Lord and Savior and repented, my tio said, clutching his overused Bible, and my mother clutching my photograph and her rosary bead she could not stand, the tears too heavy, wet-faced and broken. She wasn't supposed to go before me, she thought. Compadre Jimmy was at all the family funerals and always kissed all the women and girls on the mouth. But this time, his ghost just stopped by and sang the song he always sang for burials. Solo Dios es el hombre feliz, solo Dios es el hombre feliz. Then my love stands there in his blackout suit, staring into the ground. Venga, he thought, his only thought, angry with his fists clenched, ready to pick a fight with La Muerte and lose. Thank you.
Give it up for Savannah. Thank you. All right, we're coming to a close, and I'm so excited to invite our last teller, my dearest friend and acequia farmer, vaquero, and has so much huiza from Abiquiu, Genizaro, Abiquiueño, Virgil Trujillo. Thank you.
Well, it's good to be here. We heard music. I heard the ice break piece, and I actually have a little story that's a true story, and I think it's a good icebreaker. It's a Tao story. And the punchline will be in Spanish, but I'll do my best to interpret it. Okay? So some neighbors of ours invite us on a trip out to the Midwest. We're livestock producers, and they want us to go see what happens to our livestock, processing plants. Okay? So we're on the bus, and they've invited many community people from different communities. So there are several people from Taos. And of course, along the way, we get into storytelling, and I think you know how this goes. Everybody's trying to top the last guy's story, right? So there's this young guy, and he's the nephew of another gentleman, and I won't mention any names. The gentleman is getting into politics for the first time, okay? So he's been asked to be interviewed on the radio. And so he goes for his interview, and then of course they start asking him questions. And at one point, after several questions, the guy doing the interview wants to know what his political background is. Okay? Y le pregunta, he asks, pues ¿para qué ha servido usted? What have you served for? Wanting to know his background. And this guy's a first-time politician, so he answers, pues nunca ha servido para nada. Interpreted meaning, you can get it many different ways, but basically interprets into, I never really been good for anything. That's what it interprets to. And that's a true story. Anyway, so I'm from the Genízaro Pueblo of Abiquiu. As I was thinking about my story, I always talk about our history, but I also talk about a story my grandfather told me. And as you know, before we really got into TV and all the other distractions that can occupy and take our time, there was a lot of storytelling going on in my family, okay? And then I happened to grow up with my grandfather. I had him to age 97, and I was his caretaker for the last 5 years of his life, but he was really sharp, in tune, and I found that the most valuable thing I could do was try to download his stories. It gave him life, it made him feel like, he was recommunicating, kept his mind sharp, so on and so forth. And the cool thing was, I wanted to do that. He was like my hero. Well, so were all the other elders. When you grow up with grandparents, everybody that comes by mostly are elders. And they all have stories to share. Okay, so I've got a million stories. A lot of us don't know what the Genízaro word means. Okay? We hear it, and we hear bits and pieces of it. The Abiquiu Pueblo is a Genízaro Pueblo. Okay? The word Genízaro comes up depending what dictionary you pick up. If you're across the sea and you pick up that dictionary, it's going to say Turkish troop. Okay? And what it refers to in war, when the Ottoman Empire in war picks up all these Christians, all kind of Christian boys, and they teach them to be soldiers. They convert them, to Muslim, and they teach them to be soldiers. So that's where the word Turkish troop comes from. Okay? And I'll wrap it up, you'll see how it comes together. So when the Spanish come to this side of the puddle, now it's a puddle, before it was an ocean. Yeah, well, you get here in an hour, 2 hours, and that's how it goes. everything is labor, of course. Everything is labor. And there's a demand, and we shy away from the word, and we always did. We didn't want to say the word slave too much. We always looked at slavery just being black people liberated by, civil war, so to speak. But slavery is as old as man himself. I think we might agree to that. Okay? The word janissary is a pre-Roman word. Anyway, when he gets over here, we say genízaro. And in these huge trade fairs that are going on, especially Taos, Abiquiu had a really good one, children are being sold, okay? Young men, women, children, they're being bought, okay? Now the Spanish crown, and because the Catholic Church was their conscience, they had outlawed slavery. I mean, they just been through 700 years of this, okay? So you kind of, that might be one order of business you want to take care of, and outlaw slavery, okay? But man, being who man is, being this far away from the actual authority, it continues with some of those practices anyway, okay? So anybody that has land, you can imagine that the women in the household need somebody to help with the children, need somebody to do the laundry, need somebody to, whatever it takes, cook the food, clean the house, whatever it takes. It was a lot of labor. The man, on the other hand, perhaps, if he has a ranch, he needs somebody to do the garden, somebody to take the sheep out to graze, keep an eye on the cattle. There are safety concerns. There's just a lot going on and a lot of demand for help. Now, fast forward to 1754 as far as Abiquiu is concerned. Oh, well, there's a cool law. There are a lot of cool laws, but when we're removed from the authority, we like to kind of get away with stuff. I remind everybody about the 45-mile-an-hour speed zone. We have one in, kind of between Abiquiu and Española, and it's a pain in the rear to go 45, and it only takes you like 30 seconds more to go, but anyway, it is. So while you're going by, you're not going 45, and you're doing this, looking for the authority. Okay, so that's what's happening in early life in New Mexico. But a cool law, okay, so the genízaro, there's two styles of slavery. One is the encomienda, one is the genízaro piece. And that meant, they put this twist on it. You go to the trade fair and you purchase somebody, and it's looked like as a ransom, okay? So you've actually paid a ransom for the child or for the genízaro. The genízaro comes to your household, and now he's going to pay that ransom off in service to you, and you'll be freed at adulthood. Okay, so I've never been able to nail down that age quite good, but it said at adulthood, you were actually freed. The hard fact is, and most of these kids were coming from the plains, okay, on day one. I always did, that's my way of saying the beginning. So most genízaros can never go back, of course, right? So then we get in a little bit into the other definitions of genízaro that apply here. And if you open up a dictionary in New Mexico, you might see Hispanicized Indian. Or you may see something referring to plain Indians, like plain Indians that have lost their culture, something of that nature. Now, a gentleman from Spain that, you know tourists immediately in ABQ because you've never seen them before. And they're walking around trying to get a look at everything, and the camera is constant. Yeah, okay, we know how that works. And they're filming Bless Me Ultima, and I go up to the gentleman and his wife in a courteous way and ask him if, where they're from and if I can help with anything. And he tells me they're from Spain. And I go, oh, this is good. Well, I'm thinking already, right? And I go, here's a person from Spain. I'm going to ask him the definition of genízaro. He doesn't know I'm going to ask him, and it's going to be fresh. And he may know it, he may not, okay? And I tell him, oh, I've been waiting for you for a long time. And of course he backs up a little bit. And I told him, I keep going so he doesn't freak out yet. And I say, I have a question I've been meaning to ask someone from Spain for a long time. He says, what is it? And I tell him, do you know what the word genízaro means? And sharp as a tack. Just like that, he told me, children of war. And that was exactly what it was. Children of war. Because technically, like the sedentary people were at war with the nomadics. So it was that kind of war. And so the children were coming from there. Okay? So then I rewrite my dictionary book, and genízaro, that's my favorite definition, or the first definition. You know how some words have a lot of definitions to it. That's ABQ. In 1754, the governor of New Mexico and the local authorities are really being challenged with nomadics raiding pueblos, raiding the Spanish colonies, okay? And the genízaro, realizing that he is now a citizen, that was the law, right? You can become a citizen. That means you could own land, you can vote, you can do anything a citizen does. That's pretty cool back in that day. Okay, so the genízaro, they start to organize and they start to ask for land, okay, for a home. And the governor, Tomás Valdés Cachupín, comes up with the idea of creating genízaro settlements as buffer zones in key areas where nomadics are visiting the area, okay? And ABQ along the Chama River is perfect, okay? So that's where one. Now, there were several others made in New Mexico, and I won't get into that. I actually like to tell people about our history, because that's the history that I know best, and I say, this genízaro's history, okay? So in 1754, by a set of laws that were written by Spain after Pueblo Revolt, so that they can better take care of indigenous people, a whole brand new set of laws is written, and we know under the leyes de la Indies Reinas or Reinas Indies, something of that nature, right? And in there, it actually talks about the size of land at minimum that they'll have, which is 4 square Indian leagues. That's what ABQ is. That was at a minimum. Depending on population, you could do more, but that was at a minimum. So ABQ is created by this set of laws. So if you go up into the Pueblo in ABQ, you're going to see that all the houses are in a big square right on the plaza, the church being right in the center as well, okay? And it says that the Spanish authorities came in there, and then they measured the land out. And they went 2,500 varas castellanas, that's a Spanish measurement, to the north, to the south, east, and the west, as they stood in the center of the pueblo. And I keep using the word pueblo because that's how we've always referred to ourselves. The Spanish government made us a pueblo, and the U.S. government acknowledged us as a pueblo and then dropped the ball royally, okay? We still celebrate our feasts, we still have our dances, we're relatively quiet about it, but anyway, so you're hearing that story today, okay? So another piece to this law was that, okay, so this first measurement of land would be where the homes would be built, your gardens would exist, so on and so forth. And then a second piece of land is attached to it, and it's called an ejido, the common land. Now it's private land that belongs to that pueblo. Is that me? I hope so. I thought I had killed this thing earlier. Sorry
They have a
about
life
that.
of their own.
Anyway, so that common land belongs to them. It'll be where you graze your animals, you go for firewood, you might go for building materials like vigas and so on and so forth. Okay, and in acreage, it's about 17,000 acres. Now, they made it that big because it's a community, right? It's been built, okay, so it's a community. And interestingly enough, fast forward to the occupation of the U.S. government, they acknowledge all this. And so today, if you walk up into the pueblo, you're going to see it real quiet. The main part of the town is, you know, everybody is moved up to the newer part of the town, which many years back, going through growing pains, a certain area of the land was carved off and subdivided into lots so the young people could have a place to live. Well, all of a sudden, all the old people went another direction, and hopefully, and then the young people over there in the new part of town, now the old people, but now the old part of the pueblo is pretty quiet. Anyway, luckily I'm in the old part of the pueblo. Our deed to our land, which we've never moved, still reads May 10, 1754. Yeah, same house, same everything, okay? With that said, I want to get into a little story from my grandfather. I mentioned that my grandfather's name was Benjamin Archuleta, okay? And when my grandfather was young, he went to Indian school. Of course, we were a pueblo. Kids were going to Indian school because we hadn't been, people were still trying to find a way to shortchange Abiquiu out of their land. That was the main thing everybody was trying to take from it, especially from pueblos. And I tell people, you know how you take land from a pueblo? You make them non-Indian. Meaning, they tried to take a vote and try to get, because there was already Spanish influence, to try to get people to vote that they were not natives anymore, so that then comes in that other set of laws like taxes on the land and everything else. Well, they don't have any money. They have this resource, but they don't really have it, not in money per se. Anyway, many land grants were lost that way. A lot of land has been lost that way through taxes or non-payment of taxes. But that was occurring at that time too. But my grandfather's story goes like this. He grew up with his grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, Juan de Dios Trujillo. And Juan de Dios Trujillo was taken from Abiquiu or kidnapped when he was 9 years old, okay? His father had sent him and an older boy, Isabel Martinez, down to the creek by Abiquiu. The creek is all around us, but right on the bottom of the pueblo, to fetch a couple of donkeys. And they had specific instructions that if the donkeys weren't right at the bottom of the hill, to come home, okay? But they noticed that the donkeys had walked away and the tracks were real fresh. I would assume that them wanting to make, their father proud and so on and so forth, or do the right thing, they said, well, let's go a little further and get the donkeys and we'll come home. Well, there was already a trap set in place, and it's believed that they were what were Apache, Coyote Apaches. Okay, and we know that because when he's liberated, or at least that's where he's liberated. I'll get to that in a moment. And the they're able to catch Juan de Dios, and the older boy, Martinez, Isabel Martinez, he's about 14, and he's able to run and get away, and he runs up to Abiquiu. But because all the men are out working, it becomes real difficult for them to gather quick enough. Okay, so the captors get a head start with Juan de Dios. And Juan de Dios has relayed this story to my grandfather, and then he's giving the story to me. And he tells me the trail they take. They went up the mesa. He tells me where they went. And then things get late. They can't get enough men together to put a really good search party. I mean, you can imagine. They don't know how many guys are out there, how many men you need to take, what resources you need to have, you know, and what's going to happen. Okay. So like the next morning they go out, and they go probably about 15 miles from Abiquiu to a place called Rechuelos, and they find the campsite where they were that night, and they happen to kill one of the burros and eat, you know, some of the meat, okay? And then, but they've already got a really good head start, so they go as far as they can, and then they, I don't think give up is even the right word. By whatever reasons they decide to abandon, you know, the search, okay? And you know, that's pretty hard, because most people that got taken that way, you never see them again, okay? So Juan de Dios is taken, and he, of course he doesn't even know where he's taken. But as I would, from the first time my grandfather told a story, he'd go through it kind of quick. And then as I learned to talk and communicate with my grandfather, I realized that I could ask details about every story, and he actually knew way more details than he would say in his quick version, right? So I asked him, did Juan de Dios ever talk about what he did? And he said yes. He said that the first place they had him, he used to haul water up and down a mesa all day long. That was his only job, was to haul water. And that he had a big, like a stick he would put on his arms, and he had like some leather, you know, bags. Yeah, and that's what he would haul water. All day long he would haul water. And then at one point, he got really ill from a leg, and it swelled up, and he couldn't walk. So they kind of abandoned him and left him probably to die, okay? So my grandfather would say that Juan de Dios stayed alive by eating beyota. Beyota is like juniper berries, okay? That's what they call juniper berries. And who knows what all, you know, he probably, you know, what all it took to stay alive. But then he said que un indio rico lo había hallado, okay? An indio rico, we're saying, to him, his interpretation was a native that had means, okay? And so I would ask him, well, ¿por qué estaba rico? What did he have that made him wealthy? Oh, he had sheep and goats. This particular native had sheep and goats. And he said that he cured Juan de Dios' leg problem, cured him. And that one of the things that he used to give him was osha. And we all know about a little bit about osha. Okay, so a relationship started to form there, and with time, this native treated Juan de Dios like a son. This native gentleman had a daughter. The daughter was younger than Juan de Dios. And the daughter used to be mean to Juan de Dios. So my grandfather would say that his great-grandfather would tell him that every time she felt like it, she beat him. And you know, he'd take it. You know, he's you know, he'd take it and take it and take it. Anyway, finally one day, you know how it goes. You know, I think he got to the point where he didn't want to take it anymore. So he defended himself, however that may have been. And it wasn't good. So daughter goes and tells her dad. And now Juan de Dios is really worried. You know, he's really worried because he doesn't know what's going to happen. And the native gentleman comes to Juan de Dios, and he was mad. But he was mad because Juan de Dios hadn't told him that his daughter was beating him. So that was really good. I mean, okay. And anyway, while there, he was also taught to weave. Okay? And he was, okay, so he was taught to weave. So after, you know, he got his freedom back, I'll get into that in a moment, he actually made his living in ABQ weaving. Okay? Anyway, at that time, the U.S. government is trying to pacify the nomadics and get them onto reservations. And one of the things that's occurring is they're giving the natives, what my grandfather used to say, rations. We might call them commodities nowadays, but anyway, he would say the word rations. He used to use occasional words in English. Anyway, so there was a camp at Ojo de Gallo, and that is in down by Grants. There's a place actually called Ojo de Gallo, and that was where the army camp was. Okay, and it so happened that that's where the natives were going for rations. But the gentleman that had Juan de Dios would never go. He would never go. But the kids, the guys, kept wanting to invite Juan de Dios to go. And no, he wouldn't let him go. Finally, one day, he let him go. And at the camp, they immediately noticed that Juan de Dios was a little different. So they questioned him, and they asked him, at some point they asked him where he was from. And my grandfather says that Juan de Dios had already even forgotten to talk Spanish, but he still knew enough to communicate with him, and he told them that he was from ABQ. Well, they knew where ABQ was. And of course, what are you doing here from ABQ? That's another question. And anyway, they said there happens to be a soldier here in the camp that's from, it was a land grant right next to ABQ called the Plaza Colorada. Okay? And there's 3 land grants right next to ABQ, and it's ABQ, Plaza Colorada, and Plaza Blanca. And if you go over there, you can see the color of the soils are real red and then real white. There's white clay. Anyway. So they invited the soldier over, and he talked to Juan de Dios, and he asked him who his parents were. And the gentleman, of course, knew who his parents were. And then my grandfather would tell me that the soldier had told him, okay, well, before that, he was told that he didn't have to go back if he didn't want to. And he said, well, of course he wanted to go home. Anyway, he says no. And anyway, the gentleman that had him, then he came really mad, demanding that Juan de Dios go back with him. And anyway, it turned out that they had already, hidden him, or not hidden him, but protected him in the camp, and he didn't go back. And the soldier was going to come back to ABQ on furlough. That's another English word my grandfather would use. He was going to come back on furlough in a month. So I had to wait it out a month. Anyway, he also talks about when they came back. They got to ABQ so late in the night that the soldier told Juan de Dios that let's just stay at my house, and in the morning we'll take you to ABQ. And of course he couldn't sleep that night with all the excitement of finally trying to get home, And then the next day, of course, he was brought back home to ABQ. And my grandfather would tell me that Juan de Dios's mom couldn't stop crying from joy of seeing her son again. Anyway, that's my story.
Thank you, Virgil. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for sharing our música, our querencia, our hearts, our truth, and for being with us here tonight.